Hi, welcome to Work Comp Talk, a podcast dedicated to all of the injured workers in Northern California and all of California for that matter. My name is Carmen, your host, and joining me today is co-host Bilal Kassem. Thank you for joining me, even though we're so close to the holidays.
We record every day, all day, whenever we need to get the information to the people who need it most, right?
I 100% agree. And I love that you just said to the people that need it the most, because the reason why we're pulling this podcast today is in particular for those who are working in seasonal job openings, right? We're right around the holidays. It is the time where companies start hiring like crazy. You start seeing all these seasonal, I guess, hiring phases, and then people have questions, right? What difference does it make when you're a seasonal worker versus part-time versus full-time? Like, let's define a little bit of how workers' comp works for a seasonal worker. And what better way than to start with what's a seasonal worker?
I mean, I think seasonal workers, in workers' comp, at least, we talk about two different things, right? We think of seasonal workers as in maybe farm and labor,
Mm-hmm.
construction, depending on the industry and whether they're in season or not. But I think, more often than not, when people generally think about seasonal workers, we're really talking about the holiday rush folks, right?
Right.
The workers who are picked up for a limited time, specifically because there's a high volume of work that needs to be done. And
Yeah.
typically you see that probably around sometimes as early as October, all the way through the new year. We really see what we call seasonal workers. Those are the guys who come in who work for, Amazon or picking up extra shifts at UPS or, even companies like Tesla trying to hit manufacturing deadlines and stuff like that. There's a lot of companies that pick up extra labor to keep up with demand around the holidays.
Right. And then there's all those little pop-ups, right? You have the spirit store who does the Halloween outfits,
Yeah.
and then you have all these Christmas farm tree type of companies. Um, and that's essentially what it is. But it doesn't mean that it does not apply for someone who does work in a farm, though, right? Because obviously farms also go through seasons. It's essentially why we're doing it because it's the holiday season and it's like the biggest rush of seasonal workers. But it does apply to whoever throughout any time of the year. Just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about seasonal workers, right, it's really just a person who has been hired for a specific period of time. They know, or the employer knows that their employment is going to come to an end at some point, and it's because the quote unquote season's over, whatever
Right.
that season may be.
So let's talk a little bit about what this seasonal worker is entitled to in workers' comp, right? I feel like probably what a lot of people feel is, well, I don't necessarily am considered a full-time employee. It's like I'm only helping them during this time. So where does that leave them if they get injured?
I think the biggest difference we see for seasonal workers is temporary disability benefits. Normally when you're employed at work as a full time employee year round, and you get hurt at work and your doctor takes you off because of your medical needs or just work restrictions that the employer can't accommodate, then you get temporary total disability, and that extends throughout the duration of the time you're off, subject to
Right.
maximums obviously, but it goes year round. The calendar doesn't stop for a season. For seasonal workers, that's a little bit different because they didn't have a continuing expectation of employment. If my job ends in January but I'm TTD in March when I wouldn't be working otherwise, that would typically be an end to my TD benefits in workers' comp.
Damn, that sucks. I never even thought about it that way, right? It's kind of like you would assume that you're going to get the help that you need until you're done and you're healed and you feel better, but there's a carve out, of course. There's always carves out in workers' comp. I'm glad you specified that. So listen up, Amazon workers, warehouse workers, if you're working in FedEx. What are some of the job trades that you see the most below in Pacific Workers? Which, by the way, shout out to Pacific Workers because they're sponsoring our podcast. What is the trends that you see constantly? What are those? What are those companies?
You want me to name names or just talk about generalities?
I would love for you to name names.
I mean, there's, I think for the farming operations, a lot of them are kind of mom and pop shops for the most part. A
Right.
lot of them, they change. There's a lot of variety. We do see some of the big names over and over again, which is Amazon, certainly UPS, a big number
Right.
of people getting injured at work. And I think that's just nature of the hustle of the delivery business, the
Right.
and the goods and transportation industry. It's just very complex. It's very physically demanding, and it's certainly fast paced. And I think it's through that situation that you see a lot of injuries come up.
I mean, I see them all the time, especially right now here in Northern California. It's pouring cats and dogs, and I see them slip. They jump off the truck, they're running, they're fast, they get tangled on the lights that people put that sometimes you can't see, right? They put them on their floor in the garden and stuff like that. I am seeing a lot of guys, even in my neighborhood, that you could tell they are on a rush, right? So, what are some of the things that you guys see at the firm? Like, what are some of those injuries? Because I feel like if I work for UPS or if I work for FedEx or Amazon and I trip, I'm gonna be like, I'm a dumbass. Like, that was on me. And let's say I busted my knee somehow, but I didn't report it because I wanted to continue to work. And then what kind of injuries do you see? Do people actually say I tripped and fell and or what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a variety of things. We see a lot of overuse injuries, and it's hard to tell. I'm not a doctor, but obviously I've been doing this for well over a decade, and I can tell you I've seen a lot of back injuries, for example. And, you know, the back injuries, it may be that you do one particular activity, like, I bend down to pick up a box, or,
Hmm.
I step down off of something, out of my truck, and all of a sudden I feel my back like explode. Was it that picking up the box that did it, or was that just kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back? And I
Hmm.
think in a lot of these cases, it's kind of hard to tell, but it's a little bit of both sometimes, where you have a specific injury, and then you also have what we call cumulative trauma, which is just the wear and tear and abuse from
Right.
having to do you know God, I have so much respect for the like UPS, FedEx guys, the Amazon guys. Like I see their boxes, like you know, packed in the back of their trucks. And
Yeah.
they're lifting and carrying those things each and every day, like thousands and thousands of pounds, like going up and down stairs, wherever it is.
Right.
Like, no wonder that, you see their backs give out, their knees blown out, you
Hmm.
have shoulder problems, carpal tunnel. I think those are probably the most common. We do get the physical injuries too, where it is a one off. They slipped stepping down from their truck, or they're carrying a
Hmm.
package to a door and missed a step or didn't see something and fell down, or they did
Hmm.
pick up something really heavy and that caused them to have, a herniation in their back or a tear in their shoulder or something like that.
Right. What about when they get, because I've seen obviously everybody and their mama's on TikTok. What about when I've seen that there's other people that pretend to be the owners of the house and they come from behind and then they start wrestling for the package and then they get hit, they get beat up. Or I've also seen that they constantly, obviously, as they're dropping off the packages, I've seen them get attacked by dogs. Do you guys cover it? Does that get covered in any way, shape, or form as well?
Yeah, I'd say, oddly enough, I forgot to mention that we do get a fair amount of dog bite cases. Delivery folks who get attacked by dogs. It's something really common. A lot of people have their dogs off leash in their yard, or they open the door or something like that. The dog comes out. That's pretty common. That's covered by workers' comp. If you are assaulted at work, that's also covered by workers' comp. So if someone beats you up or even threatens to beat you up, if you're held up at gunpoint or something like that, and you
Wow.
have PTSD from it, that's certainly a valid workers' compensation case. I don't know that we've had tons of those cases, but it has happened, certainly.
Hmm. Yeah, that's crazy. It's insane. Oh, well, that kind of changes things, right? In perspective, because seasonal worker is not, they're not signed up for just working. There's things that happen. So, okay, let's say someone is working at Amazon, right? We have the Amazon warehouse. We actually have a couple of them here in Northern California, right? We have the ones in Oakley, we have the ones in Fremont or in that area. Let's say an Amazon worker just so happens to get injured. And you mentioned earlier that obviously the TD benefits, the temporary disability benefits that you would normally get if you were working in a regular job can be cut off because you're supposed to be working, for a season only. What other things can come and kind of change the game for them?
Resignations, ability to return to work, requirement that an insurance company issue something called a supplemental job displacement voucher if they can't be offered permanent modified work once they're MMI, meaning, they've medically plateaued from their injuries. Those things can all come up, certainly, with seasonal work. I think the good thing about seasonal work, I'd say, in the cases that we see, are that typically it's not a career for people.
Right.
It's just an extra buck here and there. Not all the time, but sometimes. It's a much different, path in trying to help someone navigate injury that's career ending from, let's say they're a full-time employee at UPS and they've been doing it for
Hmm.
25 years and they want to stay there, versus someone who's maybe just done their first seasonal work at Amazon. It's a different psychological perspective and experience for them
Right.
being told they can't go back to work anymore versus the person who can't go back to work anymore, but it's giving up their entire career that they've invested into. So there's certainly different considerations there throughout the claims process. And when someone's deciding, whether they want to try more significant work and limit their work restrictions so they have a better chance
Right.
of going back or not, I think when you're seasonal and you're not that invested, perhaps it gives you a better opportunity to say, what, I care about my body more than this extra money. And I think at this point, I'd rather just go someplace else and not do this kind of work anymore.
That makes sense. Okay, so you mentioned earlier some of the clients that you see. Tell me a little bit of some of the injuries that you see besides dog bites and slip and falls. Um, I want to hear it all.
Yeah, oddly enough, we get a lot of cases from, the shipping and transportation industry.
Which one? Who's the worst?
I mean, do we call them the worst? I don't know. Maybe it's just happenstance. We do see a lot of UPS cases, certainly. A
More
lot.
than Amazon?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. I think any industry where you mix really intense physical labor with really significant fast-paced deadlines, you know,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's not, seasonal per se, but a company like Tesla, right? Where it's like
Right.
build 500 cars a day or whatever your goal is, work 12 hours a day, like hustle, hustle, hustle. Like, there's just bound to have injuries happen. And it's the same thing in shipping and transportation. And I don't know, maybe even worse when you throw in like boxes full of heavy stuff,
Or the
piling up.
rain.
Or the rain, guys are out driving around, UPS drivers can get in car accidents, things like that. Amazon drivers can too, So, I think it's a mixed bag. I would say for the most part, though, we don't have injuries that are kind of outside the scope of what you would expect.
Got it.
I think a
Right.
lot of the injuries are just kind of like common knowledge that, like, if you do this type of work, like, it's not if you get hurt, it's when you get hurt.
You're bound to. Have you seen
Yeah.
that TikTok video of the guy who's getting out a fridge from the back of his pickup truck and everyone's like staring at him like what did he go ask for help and he puts the fridge to the edge of the bed of the truck and he has some specific type of dolly, tilts the fridge over to the point where it's seamlessly done and it's just like wow, this guy literally did it all by himself and he made it seem like it was so easy, came up to the situation very confident. It's things like that that I'm like, oh, this is gonna come back and bite you when you're a little bit older or with time. The wear and tear of a body can definitely take you down. But when you say things like this, like, it's the wear and tear, I think about that TikTok video. It's like, dude, people sometimes don't think about the consequences because you're fine, right? You're fine at a time where you're young and you got the energy and you have a specific way to do it. But that trade in general, like picking up heavy boxes and repetitive motion, is going to bring up what's that term you guys call in workers' comp? Cumulative trauma and stuff like that. Tell me a little bit of you mentioned this earlier too. How do you how do you know if it came from that specific injury, that moment that you accidentally threw your back out versus cumulative trauma? Walk me through that a little bit.
You don't know, I think. And, really, when you talk about those two types of cases, sometimes you're filing both because you really don't know any better, and, sometimes I think, what is it? One of the most common ways people can throw out their back is brushing their teeth. It's such like
What?
because you bend down to rinse your mouth and like your back can pop,
Mm-hmm.
It's something that's like really innocuous, that's not, no one would think like, oh, that's what did it. It's just kind of like
A
the
sneeze.
final
Yeah.
touch. Yeah, exactly. So sometimes it's hard to say, but I think it's common knowledge. Like, look, if I lift 10,000 pounds of boxes a day, that's just going to mess up my back over time.
You think it's common knowledge, but someone will probably be like, I've had my mattress for 10 years. I probably need a new mattress. They'll blame it on the mattress before they actually blame it on their repetitive duties at work.
And you don't know. I'm not a
Yeah.
doctor. I don't know. Like if I start having aches and pains, but and sometimes it's pretty obvious. Like
Hmm.
if I'm doing all this physical work as a seasonal worker, like busting my butt to meet deadlines and do all this heavy labor, and I'm doing nothing else with my life, that's that physically demanding. It's
Right.
pretty obvious where my symptoms are coming from.
Okay,
And
so you brought up a really important question that just popped up as you were mentioning this. You said you really don't know, right? You don't know where it comes from. So what do I do if I'm the one that's kind of in that limbo of, was it my mattress or was it my actual repetitive duties? What would you recommend for someone to do? Just go get checked out regardless?
yeah, I would advise people to kind of be cautious about automatically filing workers' comp, whenever you just have, you know, one ache or one pain, that comes for 1 second, I kind of like wait and see how things develop. Yeah,
Hmm.
sometimes it's obvious, right? If I'm lifting, I blow out my back, I need to report it as workers' comp. I need to get the claim process going ASAP and get treated and all that stuff. If I'm feeling, for example, a little bit sore in my shoulder, on one day, maybe I don't immediately go and report it. But, I think anytime you have symptoms that aren't going away and you may think it's work related, it's better to be safe than sorry and report that you're having symptoms and that you're not sure, but you think they may be attributable to your work,
Hmm.
and go to the doctor. Work comp
Yeah,
insurance will send you a doctor, then the doctor will say, hey, this is work related or not.
right. We'll leave the doctors, obviously, for them to call it out because it's definitely going to be a specific way to figuring it out if it is, if it's not, and
Yeah,
what
squeaky wheel
best
gets
than
the
to
grease,
double
right? If you
check.
don't talk about it, no one knows about it, and no one can help you.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. All right, so we talked about the type of injuries we commonly see during seasonal job hiring opportunities. We talked about some of the companies, unfortunately, there's easy companies that I guess would pretty much say they take care of their workers and the system is easy. Have you ever seen one of the companies be a little bit more on the shadier side? Perhaps even say to seasonal workers, hey, let's not report this and we'll make you full time.
No, but I do see, UPS has done this thing for a long time where they have a reversionary interest in their compromise and release settlements for future medical care. And it's something I don't like dealing with. I hate dealing with it. I think it's really
Mm-hmm.
not good for the clients. And normally, when you settle out medical and workers' compensation, it's called a compromise and release. They say, "Hey, here's a check. Go away." Whether it's 10,000, 100,000, 2 million, whatever it is, you take this money and you go deal with your injuries. Workers' comp's no longer liable. UPS has typically demanded this thing where the amount of money that's set aside for medical as part of like a Medicare set aside has a reversionary interest in it, which means that if they give you the money and you don't use it, it goes back to UPS. So it's kind of like,
Wait,
hey,
what? UPS is being sneaky over here? What? And is that the only company that does that?
other companies do it too, but it's a way for these companies. They want to buy out the claim, but
Mm-hmm.
they also don't want the injured worker to have the money to do with whatever they want.
That is
So they can
so
say,
shady.
well, if you don't use the money, it comes back to us. So then, a lot of times the injured worker is like, well, am I really settling my medical out still because I don't actually get the money to keep it? It's like I'm
Right.
holding it for my benefit for the time being, and then UPS is a beneficiary of that money because they get it back in the end.
Wow. And then
Which
what happens if, say, something comes up after? Like, let's say, yeah, it was all of a sudden healed. I was good. I had no issues. But then a year later, stuff starts happening and it's related to that. They kept the money. Are they going to give the money back? Like that's a
No,
whole monster to deal with.
you'll keep the money, as long as you're living, but like,
Hmm.
it can't pass to your heirs. It's not really yours. You know what I
Oh,
mean? It's like you're
yeah.
holding onto it for them and you can use it for your medical, but if you don't use it all, they get whatever it is left over back.
That's so interesting.
I guess if you're
Okay,
on your death,
PS.
I guess if you're on your deathbed, you just go spend it all, right? Say forget.
Right? I'm gonna be like, can I get surgery everywhere? It's like I need plastic surgery, I need Botox, like
Yeah.
I'm gonna get a hair
I
implant.
mean,
I'm
yeah.
going out with a look.
I mean, I don't know. I guess I kind of understand it from their perspective because they want to make
Right.
sure that, hey, the money's only being used for medical. And if it's not, we want it back kind of thing. But like at the same time, it's really difficult trying to explain that to clients who feel very passionate about wanting to be done with workers' comp and not having
Right.
any strings attached. They think, well, I get this money, I'm free and clear and never have to talk to UPS again. Well, they're still, potentially in the picture depending on the case.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. So I know in the past we've had episodes where we've talked about that extra money that you get from California to kind of re-educate yourself, the voucher, which it's called the voucher, but then the state also gives you an extra oomph to help you, right?
Yep.
Does that apply for seasonal workers as well? And by the way, I'm going to be linking that video on our description if you want to learn more about what I was just mentioning.
It does. So the supplemental job displacement voucher is something you get if you are disabled and you can't be offered permanent modified work. If
Hmm.
you can't be offered permanent modified work, then you get the voucher. And then if you get the voucher, you're entitled to what's called the return to work supplement, which is that $5,000 payment that you get from the state. It's basically like a little, hey, you know what? You're injured on the job, you can't go back to work, and you need help getting on your feet. Here's an extra 5 grand to basically put towards. I mean, you can use it for whatever you want, but it's really supposed to be to help you rehabilitate in the workforce.
I mean, if you think about it, helping you rehabilitate after an injury also means catching up on your payments because you were not working and you probably
Yeah.
weren't making ends meet. So, hey, people will see it like, oh my God, that's $5,000 that I get extra. Technically it goes right back to whoever you owe.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of the time, I think clients at the end of their case, they're in debt, they owe money to people,
Hmm.
they're struggling to get by. That $5,000 isn't like, hey, now I can go enroll in all these classes and do all this stuff to better myself and get back on my feet. It's like, hey, let me just try and get back to baseline.
Right. That sucks. Well, let's not talk about the negative because obviously we're not here to talk about that. But of the beauty of if you are a seasonal worker, you are entitled to the California workers' compensation system. Does it matter how many hours they're working?
No, no. I mean, the hours they're working can affect things like their temporary
Tax.
disability rate, their permanent disability rate, ultimately what the settlement's worth at the end of the day. But it doesn't change whether or not they're entitled to benefits.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I
So if
mean,
you're day one and
even if that means,
you get hurt, that's good. You can go ahead
yeah.
and file a case.
Yeah, that's really good to know because I feel like a lot of people feel just because they're seasonal workers, they're not entitled to the same rights as any other worker would be, whether that's part-time, full-time, or, and even they might be categorized as contractors, right? Their job might be like, oh yeah, we're just contracting you during those seasonal. How do you deal with that? Or tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I contract. There's two different types of contractors. There's contractors in the traditional sense, like you're an independent contractor, you're not
Right.
an employee.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a contractor, as in you are an employee, but you were hired on a contract basis. And sometimes seasonal workers are called contractors. They're employees, but they're contractors because they signed a contract to work for like 2 months or whatever it is.
Right.
And they are just as entitled to workers' compensation as anyone else is.
All
Yep.
right. And we're going to talk about more about the contract workers in another video that I can also link on this description so that you guys don't confuse the difference between a seasonal contract worker and an actual contract employee. Like, yeah, that's a whole contractor. It's a whole different world. But anyways, well, I really appreciate you sharing this information, especially during these times. Is there anything else that we haven't discussed that we should be mentioning to all the seasonal workers out there that are listening to the podcast or someone that may have gotten injured during the seasonal time?
No, just be safe out there. I see what you guys do, driving around, pouring cats and dogs in the rain, flooding, people yelling at you, traffic, all that stuff, in the warehouse, hustling it up. I appreciate everything you guys do, but be safe out there. Be careful.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Bilal, and I will catch you on the next episode of Work Contact. Make sure you follow and subscribe so you know when we go next on a new episode.